and welcome to another exciting episode. This is the final episode of this season on ranking the world's worst people. In this channel, we walk you through the life and evil acts of the worst people in the world, and then we rank them at the end of each episode. Our goal is to put all the worst people who have ever lived in one single league with videos that let you know exactly what they've done. So far, we've explored the evils of Mother Teresa, the man behind the Jonestown Massacre, the notorious hitman known as the Iceman, the tech genius who turned fugitive, Torquemada the torturer, the bitch of Buchenwald, the Bloody Mary, the brain behind Lysenkoism, and the Gray Man. Finally, we are at the end of this season, and we have a noteworthy episode for you today. Our final subject for the season is none other than the legendary Blood Countess. What comes to your mind when you think of the word Countess? A noble, regal woman with flamboyant dresses and hairstyles? Well, you would be correct to associate that image with the subject of our final episode, but she takes it up a notch, with a lot of blood in her trail. Some of the serial killers we have discussed on this channel, like the Iceman Richard Kuklinski, had to devise very creative ways to get rid of their victims' bodies. However, when you are of noble background and it is the 17th century where there is no technology for crime investigation, you can get away with a lot. And Elizabeth Bathory got away with over 600 murders to her name. With a track record that has earned a place on the world's highest number of murder victims, and as our final subject for this season, we are going to be taking a trip down to Hungary to explore Elizabeth Bathory's life and crimes. What makes a woman of noble background even consider the thought of killing someone, much more torturing hundreds of people viciously? How did she get away with it for so long? Why was there a peculiarity to our victims? We'll jump right into the gory details in just a minute. But before we get started, don't forget to watch this video to the end for an amazing revelation of how Elizabeth Bathory's reign of terror ended. Also, don't forget to leave a comment, like, subscribe, and hit the notifications button. Got all that done? All right, let's get started. Who was Elizabeth Bathory? Elizabeth Bathory's personal life was just as peculiar as her criminal mindset. Her family was extremely wealthy and influential. They came down from a line of Hungarian aristocrats. Elizabeth had a cousin who was once the King of Hungary, family in Transylvania, and her uncle, Stephen Bathory, was once the King of Poland, Prince of Transylvania, and the Grand Duke of Lithuania. Elizabeth's parents had the titles of Baron and Baroness, so without a doubt, she grew up like royalty. Elizabeth Bathory was born in August 1560 at the family estate in Royal Hungary, and she grew up at the Ecsed castle. With the aristocratic family tree they had, the Bathory family were practicing inbreeding to keep the royal blood pure, which means that they were marrying and reproducing with their cousins and other relatives. Many believe that the inbreeding between her parents led to Elizabeth's epilepsy. Growing up, she suffered severe seizures, and the medical treatment available at the time was to give an epileptic individual the blood of a non-sufferer. So, the doctors would rub the blood of someone who didn't have epilepsy on the epileptic patient's lips or mix the blood with a piece of the non-sufferer's skull and offer it to the patient. Elizabeth Bathory was more or less a princess, so she had access to the finest medical care, in this case, blood treatment for her epilepsy. The fact that she got exposed to ingesting copious amounts of blood so early in her life has led to various speculations that her criminal acts were inspired by her health troubles. But we will explore more on that in just a moment. With Elizabeth's family background, hardly was there a higher class of nobility for her to attain, and her parents made sure she was accurately prepared for her social status. She had the education to be admired, with lessons in Latin, German, Hungarian, and Greek from the best governesses available. She had avid interests in the arts, politics, and alchemy. When you put these details together, it seems like Elizabeth Bathory had everything set up for a promising life ahead. So, what went wrong? Nothing at first. As the practice was back then, Elizabeth Bathory was betrothed at the age of 10. She was engaged to Ferenc Nadasdy, a wealthy nobleman and heir to one of the most influential dynasties, although he was still in lower social standing than the Bathory family. There was some scandal when Elizabeth was 13 before she got married, and it was reported that Elizabeth had gotten pregnant for a peasant, and the child she bore had been taken from her, but that has not been confirmed. A few years later, when Elizabeth was 15 and Ferenc was 19, they got married and Ferenc took her surname because she had a higher social standing. Their wedding was held at a palace in Hungary, and it was lavish, as would be expected of such social ranks, with about 4,500 guests in attendance. Ferenc's wedding gift to Elizabeth was the castle of Ecsed, his inherited household, where Elizabeth lived until their deaths. Ferenc was a passionate soldier, and shortly after they got married, he was promoted to the position of chief commander of Hungarian troops, and he went away to war. Due to her husband's frequent absences, Elizabeth was primarily in charge of the family estate and the household subjects, which were the local people in surrounding villages. Additionally, because he was so often away, it took about 10 years before the couple had their first child. Elizabeth would go on to have at least 5 children, although one died as an infant. In 1601, Ferenc Bathory became bedridden with a serious illness that affected his legs, and he suffered great pains until he died in January 1604. Elizabeth, his widowed wife after 29 years of marriage, became the official administrator of his affairs, and the family estate was essentially hers. At the time of Ferenc's death, there were already several allegations against Elizabeth, but none really held water until a few years after Ferenc's death. What were the sources of these allegations? A thirst for blood. Torture chambers, bloodbaths, and grooming courts. Elizabeth Bathory had everything she could ever need to be comfortable in life, and that included a free way bill to do almost anything. To cope with her epilepsy and seizures, she had been exposed to blood use as a young child, a practice which is believed that she carried well into adulthood. However, another thing she had been exposed to as a child was a disturbing amount of cruelty. Elizabeth witnessed brutal punishments given to offenders of her family, and there were some of her relatives who had taught her about Satanism, sadomasochism, and witchcraft. When she got married to Ferenc, it was reported that he built her a special chamber at Castle Ecsed, which she designed as a torture chamber with disturbing specifications. She had been enthralled by her husband's tales of the torture methods they had applied on enemies, such as sticking pins and needles under their fingernails. When Ferenc was away for months, Elizabeth reportedly tortured her servants using those methods and inventing some of hers. Several sources state that she carried on the tortures, albeit minimally, when Ferenc was alive, but they didn't become completely diabolical until after his death. In addition to the constant torturing sprees, Elizabeth was said to have taken blood baths, believing that the blood of young girls would help her maintain youthful health and appearance. If a young servant offended her, she would torture the girl before draining her blood to either drink or bathe. Reports of her fascination with blood led to several innovations to the story, and it is acclaimed that she was the real-life inspiration to Bram Stoker's Dracula novel. Apparently, she had vampire-like tendencies, which earned her the nickname Countess Dracula and the Blood Countess. But her criminal acts didn't stop at serial killing and hunting for victims to supply her bloodbaths. Elizabeth Bathory was very creative in her torture methods, and to list all her charges would take way too much time. The most popular acts she committed, from witness statements, included chaining her victims, beating, starving, strangulation, burning, stabbing, laceration, biting off genital organs, and other forms of cannibalism. She also made them stand in ice water when it was snowing, and she would keep them out until they died. Her methods were non-traditional and showed serious signs of a completely inhumane mental state. She reportedly covered a dying naked girl with honey and set her up for ants, wasps, and other insects to feast. Although a lot of her crimes are said to have started after her husband's death, Elizabeth's victims were steadily rising in numbers. The majority of her victims were servants, and she would lure them into the castle by promoting fake job vacancies and promising them great opportunities. Since Elizabeth's family was literally the local government, complaints from the peasants went on deaf ears, and more girls continued to disappear, unnamed victims of the cruel Countess. After a while, she started craving a new form of excitement, as the peasant girls were too easy to obtain. So she moved up the social ladder and began to take girls from within her social ranks. Elizabeth Bathory was very influential and powerful, so it comes as no surprise that other noble families wanted their daughters to learn and train under her. She had something similar to a grooming court within the castle she lived, and young girls visited, but some never returned to their families. Just as Elizabeth had gotten away with her crimes for so long because she was of noble lineage, the disappearance of the young noble girls was a cause for alarm. And all the missing girls had one single thing in common: Elizabeth Bathory. Elizabeth exposed them to similar and worse treatments, but their deaths wouldn't go without repercussions. Arrest and death. When a young peasant girl goes missing, people think she probably ran off with a man or went away to work someplace else. However, when a girl of noble background goes missing strangely, it causes an uproar. Between 1602 and 1604, several rumors were alluding to the fact that Elizabeth Bathory was committing these crimes and atrocities, but no one bothered to check out the complaints. After all, the allegations were brought forward by servants and peasants, who were mostly Elizabeth's subjects. But when the news about disappearances of young girls from noble families began redirecting to Elizabeth Bathory, the higher ranks had to step in. Lutheran minister István Magyari was the first person to bring up an official complaint against her at the court in Vienna. Still, it wasn't enough to require immediate attention because Elizabeth Bathory was no ordinary citizen. But the families of the missing girls became more persistent, and finally, the Hungarian authorities began to respond. By 1610, King Matthias II assigned Count György Thurzó, the Palatine of Hungary, who oversaw judicial matters, to investigate the claims and complaints. Thurzó set up a team to investigate the alleged crimes against women of noble backgrounds, and by October 1610, they had received 52 witness statements, and it was enough for Thurzó to set out for Castle Ecsed to investigate the matter firsthand. Reports have it that upon arrival at Elizabeth's castle in December 1610, Count Thurzó didn't need any further convincing. Thurzó found Elizabeth Bathory right in the middle of one of her torture sessions and immediately arrested her, alongside 4 of her servants and supposed collaborators. The servants, 3 women and 1 man, were questioned and tortured, with their court proceedings starting early in 1611. While they denied having any active roles in the murders, they admitted to helping Elizabeth bury several bodies. The servants got sentenced to death through varying methods, including decapitation and burning, but Elizabeth had yet to face questioning, much more sentenced. The reason? Well, you guessed right: noble birth and social standing. Instead, she was placed on house arrest, confined to a barred-off room in the castle with only slits for air and food. The punishment was deliberately designed to save the Bathory family from shame and scandal and protect their assets from seizure. Elizabeth remained in her palace of horrors for the rest of her life. In September 1610, she wrote a will that left all her inheritance to her children, and 4 years later, she signed off her estates and properties and distributed them among her children. In August 1614, Elizabeth Bathory was found dead in her isolated room at the age of 54. So, did she have any moral beliefs? Elizabeth Bathory is in the Guinness World Records as the most prolific female murderer, who allegedly killed over 600 virgins. So, no, she wasn't a good person in the least definition of the word. But maybe she wasn't all bad? First, there are speculations that the tales of her evil actions and downright monstrous behavior were all made up by people who owed her family and coveted her estate. It is not off track, especially for something that happened in the 15th century. But there are accuracies in the witness statements that argue against this theory. So, while she may not have killed 600 people, she definitely killed enough to be feared. However, when she wasn't in her torture chambers inflicting unimaginable pain, Countess Elizabeth Bathory was a decent leader to her subjects in the surrounding villages. She used her influence and power to protect their borders, and there are several accounts of her intervening for poor and destitute women. She was also properly groomed, well enough to be put in charge of training young ladies on court etiquettes, except, after training them, she went on to torture the young girls. What do you think? Sources claim that Countess Elizabeth Bathory was responsible for about 650 deaths, enough to earn her the historical title of the Blood Countess and Countess Dracula, neither of which is flattering. But what do you think? Was she truly an evil, bloodthirsty noblewoman, or a victim of envy, historical manipulation, and bad press? Let us know in the comments section below. Ratings. Elizabeth Bathory had the background, education, and resources to become one of the greatest noblewomen in history. But she became notable for something different and horrific. Her acts were so vile that it was forbidden to talk about her in Hungary for several years. The locals definitely didn't want to give their children any nightmares. And going strictly by the facts that we have, we wouldn't talk about her in public either. So, based on our rating style, if 1 is purposely leaving a banana peel on the floor and 100 is puncturing holes into someone while they're alive, we'd give Countess Elizabeth Bathory 98, only missing her the last 2 points because of the time that has passed since her final days. How would you rate her? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching the final episode of this first season of Ranking the World's Worst People. Want to see more history unpacked in the next season? If so, who do you want to see? Comment down below. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, watch all the other videos in this season, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notifications. See you next season.